This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
To the highway in a brand new day. Over the rainbow, gotta let it go. Fast to freedom. Stars tonight together. Here everyone is singing.你看到我就怕，头皮发麻，我的手。
Welcome back to Open the Voice Gate, Rewind and Rewatch, episode 49, covering Open the Ultimate Gate 2014 from the McAllister Auditorium on the campus of Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana, on April 4th, 2014. We are members of the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find us on the Voices of Wrestling feed, or you can find us on our own dedicated podcast feed on all podcast platforms and applications. You can find us on Twitter at Open Voice Gate. If you'd like to donate to the show, just click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to our redcircle.com landing page. Just click the red box that says sponsor this podcast, and you can set up a one-time or recurring donation. No obligation whatsoever, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I'm one of your hosts, it's your old pal Iron Mike Spears, joined alongside, as always, my co-host and friend Case Lowe. In Case, we are approaching the end of the road. We are now in the famed McAllister Auditorium. This is the penultimate Dragon Gate USA show, and it feels like a culmination of a lot of things, I have to say, watching the show back. What were your thoughts and takeaways, and how are you feeling about this series now reaching its conclusion?
The show is dark. This is a funeral equivalent of a wrestling show. And watching these shows back, because I watched these shows live, I watched this entire weekend of WWN branded property. I watched it all live as it happened, and I haven't revisited any of it since. Now, we'll talk more next week about the Evolve show that happened on this weekend as well, and the Wrestling Odyssey show, the precursor to the WWN Super show. We'll talk about that more next week. But watching this show back, all I could think of was Pine Bluff, Missouri, that final ECW fan cam that feels like death. That's like you're invited to a funeral, and the unfortunate familiar vibe that opened the Ultimate Gate 2014, despite some highs, which I don't know if Mike will be as high on some of this stuff as I will be, but I thought there were some real highs on this show, and it was like laughing at a funeral. It was just a feeling watching this entire 2.5 hour event.
It's something that it felt like a wake. It really did. And it felt like that you're looking at the dead body of DGUSA. And the thing that's like remarkable is this isn't the last show. We still have Mercury Rising after this, so I'm wondering how more pronounced it's going to feel like next week. But boy, talk about going out with a whimper. Like, that was like, even at the time I was like, this is very depressing to watch, and then rewatching it back 7 years later almost, and it's even more depressing, watching it this time.
Well, this is something that I guess I should probably say for 2 weeks from now when we kind of wrap everything up, but I'll mention it now that the legacy of Dragon Gate USA did not have to be what it turned into. There is such a distinct and sharp tonal change from everything after the 4th anniversary show. Now we'll talk when we kind of wrap things up about all of the definitive eras of the promotion. Obviously, things start going downhill pretty fast, but just marking where all of the definitive, this is going downhill points are, is something we'll do. But after the 4th anniversary show, if that's the final show, and we go out with Gargano versus Tozawa in the main event after the 3 AR Fox versus Trent Beretta matches, which is still one of the weirdest things I've ever seen on a show. If that's the final show, I think this entire promotion is remembered differently, and I think they're remembered in a much more positive light. But for as fun as I thought Fearless and Freedom Fight 2013 were, those final two shows of 2013, the first having the Bucks versus the Bravados in the main event, the second having Gargano versus Hero, the atmosphere sucks. There's no other way to describe it. It's just awful. And then you begin with the two shows in the New York area at the beginning of the year, Revolt, which I think both Mike and I thought was a very bad show, and then Way of the Ronin, which at the very least had Hero versus Fox, Gargano versus Strong, and that very dumb, very fun Jigsaw versus Fire Ant match, which after watching a Dragon Gate USA show every week for the past year, the stupidity of that match has really resonated with me as like, oh, that's something fun. I'm glad we made it through this so we could remember a match like that. And then to come to New Orleans to be wrestling in a ring with a blue canvas. You don't even end your final Dragon Gate USA shows with the signature red ring. Now, maybe that was purposeful, as there was no Dragon Gate talent on this show. I don't know. We'll certainly talk about that in just a second, about all of the catastrophes that took place and how we ended up with a Dragon Gate USA show with no Dragon Gate wrestlers on it. But, oh my God, what a crawl to the finish line. What a bummer these final few shows have been.
Yeah, and it's something like, and I don't mean this to be distasteful, and I apologize if this comes off that way. It's like watching a loved one slowly wither away. You know? It's something that through the time, I just got so disgusted that there were a lot of shows I just skipped out on, and it just was like I couldn't bear to watch. But seeing how things were from that 4th anniversary show to the conclusion is just slowly but surely just completely losing what everything was, to the fact that it's just a name with some people that were around during the heyday. They did make some things feel like big moments here, but it's just like, why it's a slow crawl. It's not like it's not like how some indies have like huge events and then they close, like how when Chikara had their first shutdown. This is a funeral march. This is progressively watching someone wither away.
So with that in mind, let us get in to the timeline with everything that led up to Open the Ultimate Gate 2014. Like I said, next week we will talk about Evolve 28 and the Wrestling Odyssey show. We'll talk about Ring of Honor. We'll talk about maybe some New Japan, because I actually think it kind of pertains to this Dragon Gate USA show. And whatever other indie festivities were going on this weekend, including the WrestleCon Super Show. But we are going to briefly talk about WrestleCon as it pertains to the WWN universe, and I will now reference a David Bixenspan piece from his Substack, Babyface vs. Heel, and what he writes as Everything Evolves, but WWN isn't exactly out of the woods, where Bix says, back in 2013, the modern WrestleMania weekend as we now know it really got going with the first annual WrestleCon at the Meadowlands Expo Center in Secaucus, New Jersey. That year, for the first and only time, High Spot's now annual fan convention was accompanied by wrestling shows from WWN and other friendly promotions. The weekend was an overwhelming success. I vividly remember the on-site ATM at the Expo Center running out of cash, and then it never happened again. 2 months later, when announcing the 2014 event in New Orleans, High Spot stated in a press release that, in part due to the space we selected to host the convention, live events from WWN will no longer be under the same roof as WrestleCon's convention. At this time, WWN is not ready to make any announcements regarding their plans in New Orleans, but we do value their continued partnership. When they are ready to announce their intentions, we'll let you know how their shows relate to WrestleCon 2014. Bix goes on to say that oddly worded communication was pretty much the last public word on the matter. The Wrestling Observer newsletter didn't touch it until the July 8th issue, where Dave Meltzer wrote that due to the cost of the building WrestleCon booked, the WWN crew pulled out of involvement, basically echoing the press release. It's exceedingly difficult to get anyone to talk about what happened, but if you dig around in public records, you start to get a better idea of what might have happened that weekend in Secaucus. Specifically, there have been 2 liens from the New Jersey Division of Taxation on World Wrestling Network Inc. for a total of $14,901.72 in unpaid taxes since March 13th, 2014. That's just 3 weeks short of the anniversary of WrestleMania weekend 2013. The individual liens, which the court clerk confirmed by phone are still active and unpaid, are listed as $10,450.86 against World Wrestling Network Inc. and $4,450.86 against WWN owner Sal Hammawai. In the 6 years plus since WrestleMania 29 weekend, none of the WWN promotions have returned to New Jersey, even though they had previously run 5 Dragon Gate USA shows in the state, as well as 9 Evolve shows there, including 7 of the first 8. They've run bordering states plenty, but have yet to return to New Jersey, even for this year's WrestleMania weekend back in the New York City area. This time they used their regular main venue, La Boom, in Woodside, Queens. And then Bix writes, finally, it's also worth noting that the version of WWN cited in the New Jersey liens no longer exists. According to Florida Division of Corporations records, it was dissolved voluntarily on April 29th, 2016. So, Mike, off the bat, we have the split between High Spots and the WWN universe. I would say, unless you were really paying attention in 2013, you probably didn't recognize that these guys worked together at some point. What do you make of all of this?
So I distinctly remember that WrestleCon because they had this relationship back in Miami as well. Like, High Spots and WWN were paired together for the most part for a couple of years. That whole Secaucus, New Jersey WrestleMania weekend was basically an abject disaster, if my memory serves right, because you had those tax lanes, you had the fact that WWE was really starting to clamp down on third-party shows, and more importantly, third-party merch sales, because they were thinking that people were counterfeiting and were just basically pawning off WWE merchandise, which, of course, that they say that that's the reason. The real reason is that they don't want people going to those. They want them to come to their things. And it's something that with Bix's band doing this, and it's very interesting, like the way that he was able to get into this, because I would not be surprised if like the whole situation that happened with what was going to be the last WWN WrestleMania weekend in Tampa has similar results as well, because that was all I can say, and this is Ungi's Therapy words, I believe that this that this option to buy out Gabe Sapolsky and buy the libraries was very convenient, considering the fact that they rented this place and it looked like that they were about to take a bath, as many of the other WrestleMania weekend people did last year. So it's something where this is like the second to the last evolution to what the modern WrestleMania weekend was High Spots and WWN splitting apart and doing their own thing. And then, of course, then you have GCW coming up from the Joey Janela Spring Break, also from WWN for the first one on Flow Slam, and doing their own thing as well. So just was kind of like a step on the path towards what WrestleMania ended up being in 2019, the last WrestleMania weekend that really existed.
Yeah, I think depending on what aspect of the business you're in, you have a drastically different perspective on WrestleMania weekend 2013. Because on one hand, I think if you are the owner of High Spots, and I can't think of his name, Michael something, or Sal, you probably thought, wow, this weekend is such a headache because of the third-party merch crackdown that we talked about when we reviewed Open the Ultimate Gate and Mercury Rising 2013. But from a promoter's perspective, and especially from a fan's perspective, I think people realized, oh, there's something here. And you see more shows added in 2014 this year, and again, we'll talk about those more next week. An influx of shows in 2015, and then by 2016, 17, 18, and 19, it's a complete and utter free-for-all, and everybody who is anybody is running that weekend, and I think it diluted the weekend. I did not enjoy WrestleMania weekend by the final 2 or 3. I was just, it's not, to me, it should be the premier showcase of independent talent across the nation, and what it became was just a super weekend. I really thought it diluted the quality of every show, because you've had, your Pentagon Juniors and your Ray Phoenixes and your ACHs that instead of working 2 shows and having 2 great matches, they were working 8 shows and having 8 subpar matches because they had just exhausted themselves. And more power to them for making as much money as they were going to make in the entire year. As a consumer, though, I did not enjoy it. The one thing I want to ask you before I moved on was, you look at what High Spots did later in the future. They really leaned in hard to the British wrestling scene when it was hot. They brought in their own incredible array of, especially Mexican talent through the Rob Viper connection, and booked a lot of interesting international names throughout the years on WrestleMania weekend. Do you think Gabe did a good job of, how do I want to phrase this, of kind of countering that with names of his own? I mean, I believe you were there for the weekend where they brought back Sawa and brought in Daisuke Sekimoto. I guess the question is just like, what do you think the alternate universe of Gabe-specific WrestleMania weekend shows would have looked like had they continued partnering with High Spots?
I think for one, there probably would have been a outside chance that Dragon Gate USA would exist longer, because High Spots are people that take care of visas. If visas are needed, they do things on the up and up, and I could see that going. It's interesting because with the changes in Gabe Sapolsky's wrestling preferences is something I find very fascinating, and I don't think we'd be seeing Daisuke Sekimoto and Minoru Sawa in New Orleans in that case. But I don't know how much longer this relationship would have been tenable to begin with, just considering the WWN side and whatever you want to say about Sal Hamawai. You can say that. I'm not going to on air, but I'll say this. I was in New Orleans for WrestleMania 2018, and Gabe still had fun shows. Gabe's weekends of shows were still a blast, but I'll say that the pure variety that High Spots tapped into is the benefit of this relationship being severed, because got to see a Rev Pro show, got to see a Crash show, and it was in a completely different venue that actually was a lot better than WWN. Surprise, surprise. And I think that it probably worked out for the best for High Spots to get away from WWN, but I don't know if it was for the best of WWN. I guess it maybe was if you are someone who has a positive idea about their WWE affiliation, I guess.
I think that's a very fair way of looking at it. I know in the latter years, despite some, pancakes and pile drivers bullshit, although I will say the first Pancakes and Pile Driver show was actually very good, and then the last two were actively bad. But yeah, High Spots just ended up booking a bunch of stuff that I liked. They had a great Rev Pro show one year. I loved the year they booked the Crash show. Maybe that's our next project, is trying to find Crash footage, because if you go on Cage Match and click on a random Crash show from Tijuana in 2016, those cards are fever dreams. Those cards are insane, and they never found a distribution deal, basically. I mean, I know there was a rumor where it was like, oh, they're going to end up on Impact Plus, and that never happened, and it's a bummer because they booked some absolutely insane stuff, but this is not the show to get into the Crash. This is the show. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, big fans of Conan's booking, by the way. We are.
It's awesome. It's just like, oh, here's this fucking cool match that no one else on earth would book. Let's do it, and then we'll shoot it on a phone, and we'll shoot it vertically, and then it'll end up on YouTube 2 days later in like 2 parts, and that is how you will watch this Crash show. As for the news wires, we go to February 28th, where Gabe says that the Evolve and DG USA title matches are now set for the WWN Live Experience in New Orleans. We know you've waited long enough, so here we go. And Gabe announces on April 3rd at Evolve 28 the Evolve title match between Chris Hero and Trent Beretta. April 4th, Dragon Gate USA opened the Ultimate Gate, the Open the Freedom Gate title match between Johnny Gargano and Ricochet. And the important thing to note here, April 5th, Dragon Gate USA Mercury Rising 2014. The tradition continues. The annual 6-man tag team match will take place. Participants, TBA. It's not looking good, Mike. And that is a dangerous way to announce your main events, and to announce your main events with a TBA in one of the featured matches.
Yeah. And to be honest, at this point, there was already rumblings about why it was TBA. And it wasn't like he was hiding things very well.
No, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But Mike, we're gonna go to Japan for a second. We're gonna talk about the Dragon Gate Japan happenings. The final time on this show that we'll really do a breakdown of what was going on in Japan. I was talking to someone recently, and I feel like from every show, starting with probably Fearless 2010, that first show in January of 2010, we have at some point during the course of the shows that Gabe was running, and sometimes a double shot, sometimes a triple shot, even on those standalone shows, on the rare instance they would happen, we've been able to break down the happenings in Japan as well. They've worked as almost a Dragon Gate Japan timeline podcast as well. This is the final time we will have a chance to do that on this series, and we will start in Osaka, Japan. Champion Gate in Osaka 2014. The night one results of what I would say the matches that matter are a 6-man tag with Shima, Ricochet, and T-Hawk defeating Masato Yoshino, Shachihoko Boy, and Uhaa Nation. And then your 2 title matches where Genki Horiguchi retained the Brave Gate belt over Yosuke Santa Maria, and Akira Tozawa and Shingo Takagi defended the Twin Gate belts over Cyber Kong and Yamato. And then on the next night in the same building in Osaka, the final 2 matches, the title matches on Champion Gate, the Jimmies of Kanda, Susumu, and Tanizaki defeated Shima, Kness, and Super Shisa to retain the Twin Gate belts. And your main event opened the Dream Gate title match. Ricochet defeats Masato Yoshino and becomes the first Gaijin Open the Dream Gate champion.
And this was a huge deal.
Huge deal.
Like, I know that it's something that I've talked about with Rich Craich before, but 2014 in kayfabe, Ricochet was the most decorated wrestler in the world because he won this, he won Bola, didn't he win Best of Super Juniors in 2014 as well?
He did.
And then as we get into the show, and he becomes the final DGUSA Open the Free Gate champion during the lifespan DGUSA. So I remember how big of a thing this was, that I remember pulling up the Observer website when he won the title, and it's the first time I think they ever have had this, where a Dragon Gate photo was a header, and it was Ricochet wins the Open the Dream Gate champion, becomes the first a non-native Open the Dream Gate champion, and it just was something that was such a cool thing. The match rocks, and I remember pretty positively all these title matches from Champion Gate 2014. I mean, Hulk and Akira. I always call it Hulk and Akira. I mean Akira and Shingo, great tag team, one of the unsung great tag teams in Twin Gate history, versus Yamakong, which is probably Cyber Kong's best tag team partner, and that rocked. I remember that. The Brave Gate match, that was the first time we got to see kind of true babyface, plucky babyface Yosuke Santa Maria. And then the Triangle Gate match, I mean, it is such a remarkable match to look at in retrospect, knowing now that Susumu's the only person who's still full-time with Dragon Gate 7 years later.
That is hard to believe. I did not pick up on that. I just recently rewatched the main events from night 2, the Triangle Gate match and the Dream Gate match. The Triangle Gate match is excellent, and this is around the time where I'm definitely watching these shows. I'm now a fan of Dragon Gate, but it's my first run through everything, so I'm not really able to pick up on booking patterns, and everything's new and exciting, so at the same time, nothing really sticks out. And I think at the time I had severely undervalued this era of the team veteran unit and just how good they were, with Kness, who could still pretty much go at this point, Shisa, who was great, Shima did a lot of great work, kind of almost an underrated era of Shima's career just because he wasn't really working at the top of the card. This is post-Dream Gate run from him, so there's a lot of stuff to like there. And then the Dream Gate match is terrific, and it wouldn't even be the only great Dream Gate match Ricochet had that week, as just a few days later, March 6, 2014 in Korakuen Hall. Mike, I'll give you the full card just for fun. It began with Cyber Kong, KZ, and Mondai Ryu defeating Kness, Kenichiro Arai, and Super Shisa. UT defeated Kotoka in a 4-minute singles match. Gamma and Masaki Mochizuki defeated Don Fuji and Ryotsu Shimizu. Hulk and Doi defeated Kanda and Tanizaki. And then we get to the business end of the card with Yamato defeating T-Hawk in a no-ropes match. A 9-man tag team 3-way elimination with Tozawa, Yoshino, and Shingo of Monster Express defeating Eita, Flamita, and Yosuke Santa Maria of the Millennials, as well as Genki Horiguchi, Jimmy Kagetora, and Jimmy Susumu of the Jimmies. All before main event opened the Dream Gate title match. 2 Americans in the main event of Korakuen Hall. Ricochet defeats Uhaa Nation.
Yeah, this is one of those seminal Korakuens and Episodes of Infinity because they sold out Korakuen Hall with this. With 2 Americans up top, a new champion making his V1, and Uhaa Nation's first ever Dream Key. And this is just like a big show. I remember how much I loved Fujihaya of Don Fuji and Ryotsu Shimizu. It just was like a really fun undercard tag team. And really, from my memory at least, you start from that match on for the last 6 matches there, because I think at this time all the Korakuens were on Ustream. Like, I remember watching this and the show rocked.
Yeah, this is a super good show. That Yamato T-Hawk match, I believe, and Mike agreed with me before we started recording, that is the last no ropes match that Dragon Gate has booked. If you remember a no ropes match later than Yamato versus T-Hawk, please tweet at us at Open Voice Gate, let us know, because we could not think of one. And that Ricochet versus Uhaa match, they had that great match in Korakuen, and then they had a match in Evolve at the Brooklyn Lyceum for the Open the Freedom Gate title later on in 2014 that was also really good. So, the WWE can't find anything to do with those guys, but I think they're pretty good wrestlers.
I mean, it was something that, so now that we talked about this Korakuen, the end of Champion Gate was this huge ovation. Everyone was kind of astonished because this was kind of one of the big things that have never happened, and had a huge reaction. And then Uhaa shows up and he goes, hey, so you're champion, congratulations. But I hope you enjoy that belt, because I'm coming for it right now and I want to face you. And then Ricochet this was all in English, by the way, so the crowd was not following him that much. and then Ricochet was like, yes, we'll do this at Korakuen. And Ricochet's typical not very good promo style.
Yes, almost a broken English promo from Ricochet, although he grew up in Kentucky. It's, the way he made his living. More power to him. And then after this Korakuen main event, Yamato comes out, he attacks Ricochet, and Uhaa says, hey, if you're gonna wrestle him, you have to get through me. But Mike, that does not happen on our timeline, so we will not be talking about Yamato versus Uhaa Nation and the subsequent Yamato versus Ricochet match. What we will talk about, the final time we'll talk about Dragon Gate Japan on this show, a show that I don't believe either of us have seen, the March 16th Memorial Gate and Wakayama show. I bring this up for the latter half of the card, the title matches, mainly Open the Brave Gate title match. Flamita defeats Genki Horiguchi and wins his first Open the Brave Gate title, a legendary Open the Brave Gate run that begins on a Memorial Gate and Wakayama show, of all shows to begin that title run on. And then after that, Masato Yoshino and Uhaa Nation defeat KZ and Yamato and Masaki Mochizuki and Super Shisa. There was an Open the Triangle Gate match with Eita, T-Hawk, and UT winning the belts over Kanda, Susumu, and Tanizaki. And then your main event, not Masato Yoshino, but rather Akira Tozawa and Shingo Takagi retain the Twin Gate belts over BB Hulk and Naruki Doi. A very fun looking show, if I say so myself.
Yeah, and the reason why we say we haven't seen it, this was only recently through Dragon Gate Network they started airing these Wakayama shows. They were put on and more bought by Wakayama TV, which is a branch of MBS, which owns Gaora, but they would only come out on DVD, and they come out in DVD like 6 months later. I used to buy these, but this must have been before I bought them, because I'm looking at the rest of this card, and it's a astounding looking card. I mean, they loaded up this for a Wakayama show, which usually got
Takayama versus Stalker Ichikawa.
I made, if you're buying a Dragon Gate show and you're putting it on there and you're putting it on your local TV, you bring in Yoshihiro Takayama.
Well, Mike, with that in mind, we return stateside. Again, we're going chronological here. So after the March 16th Memorial Gate show, we have a week of silence in America, no real newsworthy stuff from Gabe Sapolsky until March 24th with an email, a newswire, where the title of that newswire is in all caps, "Get ready to jump out of your seat." And on March 24th, 2014, Gabe Sapolsky announces Chris Hero versus Masato Tanaka for Dragon Gate USA Open the Ultimate Gate on Friday night, April 4th. Mike, do you remember this announcement, and do you remember being concerned when Masato Tanaka was booked on this show?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was the thing that was confirming what everyone was speaking about the visas. And I was like, okay, that match is cool, but you only had Yosuke Santa Maria on the last weekend. You've been decreasing the amount of fly-ins that you have from Japan. And where are the big pieces? Where's Shima? Where's Akira Tozawa? Where are like the prominent faces of DGUSA from Dragon Gate? And no announcement there, and was just kind of like the step that everyone needed to go like, all right, this is it. This is over.
Yeah, it is not a good sign. And from there we go to Sunday, March 30th, 2014. And Mike, we have a bit of a scoop with a Z, some scoops. This is something that I don't believe has ever been public information. It wasn't in the Observer. It wasn't in any F4Ws. What we have is screenshots of an email correspondence between Gabe Sapolsky and someone who, to protect their identity, not that the mob's going to come out, not that Sal is going to come after them, someone who was not affiliated with Dragon Gate USA, Evolve, WWN in any working capacity. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think let's leave it at that.
Yes.
Because if we tell any more specifics, he'll give up who it is.
Exactly. But Gabe had emailed this person on March 30th, one line. He said, "Are any of these guys over?" And then you have a clear copy and paste from, I don't know, I'm assuming it was another email, but the font is different, the size of the font is different, and there's a background color on these names that is not there for Gabe's normal text. And the names are Kotoka, Tamanaga, Ryotsu, and Mondai Ryu, which is very funny because Gabe had booked Mondai Ryu a few years ago and clearly did not remember that he booked him, which is just delightful. So what we have is basically a last-ditch effort to get 4 young Dragon Gate talents on this show. What happens is the person that Gabe emailed responded a day later and, gave this rundown of, Kotoka's this lightning rod babyface. Shimizu, this is pre-Big R Shimizu. This is still Ryotsu anime character Shimizu. He's kind of wacky, but, I think he could work in the promotion. Tamanaga's a jobber, but he's fun. And Mondai Ryu, you've booked before. He's not good, but, he's not whatever. That email is sent, and then Gabe responds by saying, thank you for your intelligence, but we got some feedback essentially saying to not use these guys, so we are not going to use them. And I don't think it's been public knowledge that my understanding of reading this situation is that there was a chance that Kotoka, Tamanaga, Ryotsu Shimizu, and Mondai Ryu could have been booked on this show.
Which completely deflates the public justification for the ending of Dragon Gate USA, basically.
Which was
the fact they couldn't get visas, and then they would try again next year, and they just never mentioned that they were doing it, and they said that the brand is on hold.
Yes, and that is I think to some extent it's true, but there was very clearly a last-ditch effort just a few days before this show began to get these Japanese talents over. But instead what happens is around the same time that Gabe responds back to this person saying that he's received word that they're not going to go forward using these talents, Gabe says publicly in a newswire on March 31st, "It is with deep regret that that DGUSA must inform our audience of the unfortunate fact that the Dragon Gate Japanese talent will not be able to perform on WrestleMania weekend shows. We have prepared a series of replacements. We have already booked Masato Tanaka versus Chris Hero. As the entire pro wrestling world converges on New Orleans this week, the last thing our audience wants to hear or read about is promotional drama. We know you have practically unlimited choices this coming week. We are going to make sure all of you who choose to support DGUSA are rewarded with the best experience possible. Here are some replacements." And then Gabe goes on to announce Low-Ki making his Dragon Gate USA return and having his first high-profile singles matches in over a year at the Friday and Saturday night events. It will be Low-Ki versus Trent Beretta on this show, and then Low-Ki versus Johnny Gargano on next week's show. And then also the announcement that Bad Influence of Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian will wrestle on the main event dark match of Mercury Rising 2014. Mike, I want to let you know now, I have that match, and we will be reviewing it next week.
Sounds good. So yeah, this is his attempt to make good, is completely have a show divorced of any Dragon Gate continuity.
So Gabe goes on to say in these emails, pretty much right after sending out that newswire, or maybe right before, around the same time, it was on the same day, March 31st, Gabe says to the person that he was corresponding with, "We managed to get Low-Ki, so we will have Low-Ki Beretta on Friday and Low-Ki versus Gargano on Saturday. So 2 fresh, awesome matches for him. Then on Saturday, we have Daniels and Kazarian in a dark match for the live ticket holders, and we'll get them awesome opponents." Now, Mike, do you think that was the bravados, or do you think Gabe had something else planned?
I think he was billing it there. I think it was going to be the bravados. I think at that point, given where the wrestling world is in 2014, he wasn't going to suddenly reunite the American Wolves here.
Oh, God, could you imagine, though? So Gabe goes on to say, we still have one more shoe to drop, but I don't even want to tease you with it in case it doesn't happen. It would put Saturday's show over the top. Also, the lineups shaped up nicely in general. Mike, I don't think that last shoe to drop is Roderick Strong. I mean, is that what Gabe was hyping up here? Because we'll talk about Roddy next week. He's on those shows, but from Gabe's email, and this is not Gabe in seller's mode, this is, a human form of Gabe Sapolsky, if there is one, that doesn't sound like Roderick Strong.
Maybe he had other plans, but it just does... When he was putting this together, by that time, it would have been very hard to pick up people to get there, Like, if that makes sense. I don't think that he would have... This isn't 2019 where basically everyone in wrestling converges on one city for a weekend. This was 2014 where there were a lot of events and people still came to those weekends, but it was not it was not nearly the festival of a weekend that it became. So maybe he had something there, but it just doesn't seem... It doesn't pass my personal smell test, I guess.
So Gabe's final note in this email transaction, and I will read him verbatim here, he says, I'm going crazy having to do the best we can to make things up. We literally missed the deadline on getting the DG guys by 1 day after months of work. I exhausted every possibility. Shelley, Omega, Devitt, anyone that would mean something big. No luck until Key and Bad Influence. Well, Tanaka was a huge strike too. It's been rough, especially with taking all this abuse online. I mean, it's like 12 years I haven't done anything in good faith at all, and now I'm some carny. We have literally spent every day in the last 2 months thinking we'd be able to announce the DG guys. We are still doing the trios tourney. If we can get one shoe to drop, it will have a match that will make your head explode. So...
He's spinning there. He's absolutely spinning there. When earlier in that week they emailed the person, he already listed 4 names that Dragon Gate was prepared to send over. So it's not a Visas thing. At least that's my interpretation of that.
Yeah, I think having a list of names there. Now, there's something I'll read you from the Observer in just a second that will maybe contradict that point. But having the list of names there is pretty damning for Gabe. Now, I also think there's some validity to his point that, I think I've always been a little bit more pro-Gabe than most people. I think Gabe handles himself very poorly, even in situations where he's trying to do the right thing, even when he's coming from a good-hearted perspective. And this is one of those times where, I guess sympathize for him to some extent, where, I don't think Gabe was maliciously trying to hold Dragon Gate USA shows on their biggest weekend with no Dragon Gate talent, but it's also not a good look when we have these names here. Now, the one thing, before you respond to that I will read you, that this was new information to me from the April 14th Wrestling Observer newsletter, where Dave says, Dragon Gate talent from Japan will be back in May for shows in New York. Apparently there was an issue regarding renewals of working visas for the talent and them not coming in on time to get talent out for the past weekend. The issue with that is that it is an Evolve show in May in New York, and I can double check, but I believe it was already announced as an Evolve show in May in New York by the time that was in the Observer. I think everybody knew going forward that at the end of May, Gabe is doing Evolve in Queens, and I think it was May 9th and May 10th.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, just the fact that this person was asked about Shimizu, Tominaga, Kotoka, and Mondai Ryu, completely, do I think there's issues with renewing visas? Yeah, probably. Given the lifespan of the promotion and my understanding of working visas, they would have to been up for renewal one time or another. Don't get me wrong, I fully believe that part, but the fact that the Japanese office presented these names and the fact that they already seemingly had a card for Queens for Evolve, just completely, again, it's spin to me.
Yeah, so just to confirm, on April 10th, 2014, so coming out of this weekend, and this would have been published right around the same time as the April 14th Wrestling Observer newsletter, Gabe had announced that it was Evolve specifically returning to Queens with no Dragon Gate talents hinted at, announced, or, even alluded to in some way. So I'm choosing to believe that the names that we got in the email were for these New Orleans shows, and that they could have been, Mondai Ryu is the one that sticks out a little bit, but you could have billed Kotoka, Tamanaga, and Shimizu as, the future of Dragon Gate taking over this trios tournament. I don't think Gabe was necessarily worried about fitting into Dragon Gate canon at this time, but that would have worked and that would have been realistic. Mondai Ryu is the one name there that sticks out a little bit as being odd, but from the evidence we have, I have no reason to believe that Kotoka, Tamanaga, Ryotsu Shimizu, and Mondai Ryu weren't at some point at least on paper as possibilities for New Orleans late into the month of March.
Yeah, and given the time for those three, that would have fit the time span for when they would have wanted to send people out on excursion. Like Kotoka, that would have been very late for his excursion. Shimizu, that would have been about the right time, and of course Tominaga. So like all of this like lines up to me in some fashion for it. But I just look at this and I look at how things were said publicly, and it's just like it seems like to me that Gabe clearly had no idea who these four people were, especially considering that Mondai Ryu was over at Super Shenlong 2. Like, he was over in the States for, I believe, the first anniversary weekend, right?
Yes,
like that was,
because he worked the Chikara show as well.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So, and then someone told him to not book them. And Dragon Gate was trying there. And Dragon Gate, like, if we want to, like, fast forward past everything and talk about 2019, High Spots tried bringing Dragon Gate, but Dragon Gate insisted on visas. So, like, and then later Dragon Gate said, like, okay, we will still fly our folks out there. And at the very least, the president of Dragon Gate Japan, Toru Kido, was in New York. So it's not like it's not like that Japan wasn't doing this when this was a massive money loser for them, because if my understanding was right, I think Dragon Gate Japan paid for all the tickets from Japan to America. So I could see this probably as the point where when he turned down these wrestlers, that was it in the relationship.
The final note we have before we talk about Open the Ultimate Gate 2014 is a note from the April 7th Wrestling Observer newsletter, where Dave notes that Ricochet and Johnny Gargano have signed new deals with Dragon Gate USA, which will prevent them from working Ring of Honor going forward. So, very interesting. I've had this working theory that Gargano's title run was essentially worked around this idea that by the time Gargano drops his belt, Gabe wanted him not out of the promotion that he was sick of him, but wanted him, was prepping him, grooming him for national television style wrestling. And instead they signed long-term deals with Dragon Gate USA.
Which, for Ricochet, that makes sense at the very least, because this was still another year or so before Lucha Underground. So that makes sense with that for him. However, for like Gargano, yeah, it was very clear that they were trying to position him for getting signed by WWE or TNA in one fashion or another, and I guess it just didn't happen. I knew he had a lot of tryouts before eventually DIY got him signed, so it wasn't for a lack of trying. But yeah, it does feel like, and especially within this match, it felt like that this could have been the write-off for Johnny Gargano.
And with that in mind, Mike, it is time we open the Ultimate Gate. Open the Ultimate Gate 2014. You have the floor.
All right, so as we said at the top, this is Open the Ultimate Gate 2014 from the McAllister Auditorium on the campus of Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana on April 4th, 2014. And we open up with terrible hard cam, lasers going off, some real Flow Slam vibes. And the thing that frustrated me, perhaps other than some production things I'll talk about later, but frustrated me the most, a pony ring. They had not a standard ring that would go up to whomever's waist on the outside. It's a pony ring, which I think is only 2 feet off the ground.
Yeah, this would have fit in like World of Sport. And the fact that this is the ring that Dragon Gate USA chooses to close out their existence with. Again, do you think there's any validity to Gabe thinking like, well, we don't have Dragon Gate talent on the show, maybe we shouldn't use the canvas? Or do you think this is laziness?
I think it's whoever provided I think it was Wildcat who provided him with the ring, and
Yes.
This was the ring they had available. Like, that's my guess.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. You wouldn't want to use a canvas that is too big for the ring you have. It is just a very bad look, though.
Oh, it's absolutely atrocious looking look. And then speaking about that case, Open the United Gate championship match start off the show is the Bravado brothers of Harlem and Lancelot Bravado with the offensive lineman for the Bravado bandwagon Moose, defeating the premier athlete brand of Anthony Nese and Caleb Conley, accompanied by Mr. A and Sue Young, when the Bravado brothers hit the gentleman's agreement on Anthony Nese in 15 minutes and 20 seconds.
One of my least favorite matches in Dragon Gate USA history.
Just depressing.
It is a disaster on multiple levels. The highlight of this match is Colt Cabana on commentary. Just brief aside, the fact that World Wrestling Entertainment, I know they later sued Colt Cabana, but the fact that they didn't hire him as a commentator around this time period blows my mind, because he is so good on commentary, and specifically him doing a low-key impression really, really made me laugh, because other than that, this match was a total disaster. It was the two top heel teams in the company wrestling each other, where neither one of them established that they were going to be the baby faces in this match. It was just like watching two heels wrestle, which I think there's probably guys in this universe, in the independent landscape at the time, that could have gotten away with this, but the Bravados were an incredibly character-heavy act, and Nese and Conley and the Premier Athlete brand were doing a lot of heavy character stuff. So you just had four heels fighting one another in a match that had no pacing, was all over the place. Mike, unless I missed something, the Bravado tag rules that were heavily established on the last two shows were just non-existent in this match. And that's all before the finish, which I thought was a total disaster.
Yeah, and the match itself before the finish wasn't very good. Neither of these teams are over, so there's no investment for the crowd to choose one side to be the babyfaces to begin with. And Caleb Conley really doesn't have any juice now, recently turning back heel after his pretty short babyface run.
It kind of felt like he was getting over as a babyface. Am I wrong in saying that?
I like him as a babyface.
I thought it was great.
I thought that there was some heart there, and it's utterly devoid here. Basically, every dive in this match was missed, including a quebrada that Anthony Nese went too far and completely overshot a Bravado brother. It just was a mess.
You know, I will say this, and I'm not a wrestler. I don't typically like breaking down stuff in this fashion. I have a hard time blaming that on Nese, because if you look at where the Bravado's positioned, and I know the ring is tiny, Nese could have very easily done this Cape Rana from one side of the ring to the other if he wanted to. The Bravado brother is so close to the ropes, I don't think it would have been physically possible for Nese to have jumped and done a flip in that short of a distance. I think the Bravado brother was out of position there, but either way, it was a bad look for everybody involved.
And it could have been the fact that a pony ring, I think the most that they are 16 by 16. So maybe it was like your perception wise, you're like, okay, this feels like the right place to be laid for a quebrada. And then Nese was like, okay, I'm going to go do my quebrada, but it just looked awful. Lenny and Colt tried to save it, but it just was a bad match. And then the finish was like a big schmoz with Mr. A and Moose, and then it kind of just finished mediocre with just then after the schmoz, just go to finish, hit the gentleman's agreement on Nese, and then get out of here. It just was bad.
Yeah, Mr. A comes in the ring to run interference for the Premier Athlete brand, but at least I don't have it in my notes. I think he just stood there. Like, I think he just got in the ring and stared at everybody, and everybody kind of froze until Moose, who I thought fucked up the finish on the last Brooklyn show against Chuck Taylor and Drew Gulak, where I choose to blame that on Moose, because even in 2014, Drew Gulak was an excellent professional wrestler, where Gulak had to completely do a 180 to get in position for Moose to spear him. This time, I'm just assuming Moose was late, and that's why Mr. A ended up looking like an idiot before Moose could come in and spear him. It made everybody look bad. It's just, Moose was weirdly so unimpressive in this role, which is weird considering, he bounced to Ring of Honor in June of 2014, I think, and kind of comes across like a major league act pretty quickly there, but in Evolve, he is just a walking disaster. And then you have this deflating finish. This is what I feel like is almost a generous 2 stars.
Yeah, I was too flat as well. It just is something that you've already pretty much killed off whatever charm Mr. A had when he whiffed in Brooklyn. And then you had this again, and he just, this act is dead now. The Premier Athlete brand was dead there, and the Bravado Brothers, who I was always a little bit more down on than you were, just still kind of just exist, and they're doing character, and it doesn't work when you don't have a babyface team to go against. I mean, they're fine, but the match itself was just like we didn't even mention this. There was like this step over tope that Harlem Bravado did that was really funny, and I say funny in a way that sometimes I like watching dash cam videos of like car wrecks in Russia. Funny,
Jesus.
Like you've never heard of those?
No,
Like the Russian.
Mike, I watch Ridiculousness. That's an entire category on that show. It's just, it's less charming when Rob Dyrdek's not the one saying it.
That's fair. That's fair.
But I will say on that dive, I cut you off. Go ahead, finish your thought on the dive. I'll defend it.
Oh, I was gonna say no one caught him at all.
So thank you. How is Mr. A not? That's a Dragon Gate thing, and that is in a weird way, like if 5 years into this promotion, if the Americans should have learned anything about working with Dragon Gate talent, it's that if you're gonna do this crazy like walk the plank style dive off of the ring post to the floor, and you have Mr. A available, dive onto Mr. A. That's a big target that's hard to miss. But instead, he dives onto two skinny guys in Conley and Nice, and of course they don't catch him. Like, I would have catch him either. That looks like it sucks to take.
Yeah, no, it just this match was just completely like we're being terrible when we say it's 2 stars, and I think another reason why we're terrible is what we're going to talk about after the Mike segment here. So unless we want to bury this anymore, Case, let's talk about the post match.
No, I'm so excited to get into what comes next.
So, Anthony Nese picks up the microphone. Remember when he was really charming going, "Hey, I fucking rock"? That's way gone at this point.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. The character assassination of Anthony Nese is just, it's awful. Because again, when, he worked some shows in 2011 and we were like, oh, that's a guy, he'll show up again later. When he showed up at WrestleMania weekend 2013 and into the 4th anniversary weekend, run the tape. I was like, holy shit, this guy's so good. I had no idea that Anthony Nese was ever this good. And my God, does it die a quick and painful death.
It's just incredibly like and it's not necessarily Nese. It's how he's booked and the things that the promos he's trying to give. Like, yeah, some of the promo, of course, is his fault, but it doesn't feel like he's doing much different. But just the booking and the angles around him are just detestable. They're just bad.
He was a really protected character when this Premier Athlete brand stuff started, and as soon as he started looking weak, as soon as he started losing, whatever effect was there in the beginning was completely and utterly removed. It was gone.
Yeah, so he grabs the microphone. He's basically incomprehensible, but he's mad at Mr. A. Su Yung then calls off him, Nese and Conley from attacking Mr. A, and you can kind of hear Su Yung a little bit better, but she berates him and tells him to beat the next person that comes across the apron and put them straight on that apron, and then it's AR Fox, and then Colt covers before Rod Nemi, someone who is going to be a big figure if you listen to the accompanying podcast Everything Evolves, is now joining Lenny Leonard on commentary.
Yeah, so a lot happens there. The short of it is that Anthony Nese cuts a promo that we can't hear. Su Yung, because she's yelling, cuts a promo that we can kind of hear. AR Fox comes out. Colt Cabana has to go to a booking at that point, so Ron Nemi comes in the booth. I like Ron Nemi's commentary. I don't know how other people feel about it. I always thought he and Lenny worked well together. And then we have the biggest, like, why not shoulder shrug match of all time, AR Fox versus Mr. A.
Yeah, so AR Fox defeats Mr. A with Su Yung in 13 minutes and 14 seconds with a low main pain. If we just said that and that was the result, you'd be like, okay, no, that makes sense. Wow, you got Mr. A up for the low main pain. That's something. But it's what happens during this match, Case, that makes it an outright dud.
Ma'am, I can assure you that cat is a trained professional.
Yeah, so... The pony ring completely handicaps AR Fox's offense. You can't really do a kickflip when you have less ground for you to count on for falling, so you have to do a tighter rotation, and it looks bad. Mr. A has no credibility, but AR Fox was trying to make it look good. Partway through, Ivelisse came out to stop Su Yung, and then Larry Dallas came out with his new signee, Teddy Hart with Mr. Money puts Mr. Money on the top turnbuckle and proceeds to beat the crap out of both of these guys. The referee turns around kind of dumbfounded and said, well, I guess you tagged both of them. The match can continue. Not calling it a no contest. Like, that would be a no contest at that point. And then they go to a finish that Mr. A can't get up on the top turnbuckle and eventually does. And then we get the worst low main pain I've ever seen.
Okay. There's a few things I want to talk about here. The Teddy Hart stuff is fucking insane. I did not remember him being on this show. I only thought he showed up on the second show. So I did not know that this was coming. And when Larry Dallas walked out with Teddy Hart, I lost my fucking mind because I had no recollection of this happening in this match, because you have this Evil Su Yung cat fight, which, you know, whatever. I in a weird way, I understand what this match was trying to accomplish. This was a bad ECW tribute that highlighted all of the bad things about ECW. But this was bad, but I didn't hate it, if that makes sense. I lost my emotional connection to this match as soon as Teddy Hart came out. But the fact that Teddy Hart comes out, he beats everybody up, he goes to the back, and then the match just continued, is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It was like a video game glitch where Teddy Hart mode was activated, and as soon as they figured out how to counterbalance that, he walked backstage, and then AR Fox stood up selling none of what just happened to him, and they went on and had their match like they were planning to do. One of the funniest things I've ever seen.
You know what? Good for AR Fox. Good for AR Fox. I appreciate that.
It's shocking. I mean, Teddy Hart comes out, and again, just the middle of the match, and this is after the opening match where Mr. A just stood in the middle of the ring waiting for Moose to hit him with a spear. So we're already in this weird, like, 2007 TNA zone where the rules are just different for every match. It's like Brian Alvarez used to say, every TNA wrestler has his own set of rules. That's exactly what was happening here. We just had interference, like it was a 1998 Monday Night Raw, and it was happening just because, and it just so happens that interference in this match was Teddy Hart, who came out, did the powerbomb backbreaker to AR Fox. I'm sure he did something to Mr. A. I don't remember specifically what it was. Taunts, and then leaves, and it's fucking insane. And then
I mean, go ahead, sorry.
And then they go to the finish.
It's something for me that I know it gave you TNA vibes. This gave me Mercury Rising 2010 vibes.
Oh,
like,
well, I was annoyed by the Teddy stuff in Phoenix because it, like, maybe it's just the perception of Dragon Gate USA at the time where it's like, man, I really don't want this on my Dragon Gate USA shows. I am not annoyed by Mr. A versus AR Fox with Teddy Hart running interference. I found this entire thing to be cringeworthy and embarrassing and at the same time hilarious.
Well, at this part, this promotion's dead. So it's easier to be like, oh yeah, this is hilarious here, where that was still in the vibrancy of where Dragon Gate USA was at that time. So I understand that, but it just was something that you just kind of take a step back from everything and you're like, what are we doing here? And it's just so abrupt. Like, you know what this run-in was like? Did you ever get a chance to play the N64 Aki wrestling games, like WCW versus the World, WCW, NWO?
I have not, but I know the direction you're going with this.
Yeah, where someone can pick up a controller and just do a run-in.
Thank you, Joe Gagne's Funtime Arcade, for teaching me that.
Yep. Thanks, Joe Gagne, friend of the show there. But that's the vibe that you got here. And at this point, you had arguably one of the most disastrous first 45 minutes of the Dragon Gate USA show, because it's not like that these matches were short and then dumb things happen. Both of these matches got significant time. So 15 minutes on the opener, 13 minutes 14 seconds on the second match, and then 5 minutes in between that, and then you just had like just the weird, like, everyone just going like, this is really bizarre, and then let's have Rich Swann versus Biff Busick. That sounds great.
The final point I'll make on the AR Fox versus Mr. A match, and I know I disagree with Mike on this, it's not like, this match is impossible to rate because of the Teddy stuff, but the AR Fox versus Mr. A portions of the match Is it what I want from AR Fox on WrestleMania weekend? No, it is not. I didn't think it was bad, though. And it speaks to just how talented AR Fox is that, he essentially had dollar store roadkill to deal with in this match, and Fox was like, okay, I'm just going to bounce off of him. I'm going to run at him and bump, and that's going to be our match, and then at the very end, I'll do my signature move, which I did not think looked as bad as Mike did. I thought it was actually impressive that Fox was able to do a low main pain with this guy. It is really, really incredible to see how much AR Fox has grown from United Philly in a scramble match to now, because this was a very impressive carry job in my mind from AR Fox.
And that's entirely fair. I just think that Mr. A is so bad at this point that anything that AR Fox does, and he does do a lot to make this somewhat work, is completely destroyed by the run-in and then Mr. A's inability and lack of credibility whatsoever.
Yeah, it's, again, not what I would want for AR Fox to do on this weekend. I just refuse to believe there's not a better matchup for him somewhere on the card. But
absolutely.
For what it was, again, removing the Teddy Hart stuff, I didn't hate AR Fox versus Mr. A as a match. Impossible to rate because we had the Teddy stuff, but I enjoyed the actual match for what it was.
I understand. I mean, like, this is funny bad. Like, to be fair, like, this is so ridiculous and preposterous that it's super funny.
Well, again, I think the Teddy stuff is funny bad. I did not have a ton of issues. Now, it wasn't a good match, but I did not have a ton of issues with Fox versus Mr. A from like an in-ring standpoint, but we just disagree on that.
That's fair. And then we went into the third match of the show. It was Rich Swann versus Biff Busick. He defeated Biff Busick with an Oklahoma Stampede in 10 minutes and 31 seconds. And when Biff Busick came out in like warm-up clothes, I thought he was going to wrestle that way, Case. And that completely, I was like, all right, this is going to be another absurd thing. And then I thought this turned out to be a perfectly passable match.
It was probably the worst version of a Rich Swann versus Biff Busick match there could be, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I like, it was fine because it was kind of a normal match, but then I thought the finish came out of nowhere. It was bizarre because they do this kind of, this roll-up sequence, and then it which didn't look good, and then Swann rolls him up that way for the win. It was a bummer because, I've gone on and on this series about how good I think Rich Swann is and how I think Gabe devalued him and he was so underrated. And then he comes in here against Biff, and by 2014, Biff is well on his way to being a top-tier indie worker, and I thought they had a very flat 3-star match here.
Yeah, I was 3 1/4. It was something where, like, this was also worked very slow, and it was something where, like, there was a pile driver that they talked about the pile driver rule in Los Angeles, Louisiana, and that took me back to when I was in WrestleMania weekend, and everyone was like, so how are they going to have Nick Gage versus Penta El Zero if you can't have hardcore or pile drivers? They found a way around it, but the rest of it was kind of fine, and it felt like it was kind of abrupt, as if that everything else, because of Teddy Hart, went super long and they had to cut stuff there.
That is probably what happened, and I had not thought about that, but now that you say it, I mean, the way AR Fox and Mr. A reacted to Teddy Hart coming out was that they didn't know Teddy was going to do the run-in, and from the aftermath of it, and AR Fox kind of shrugging all of it off, that might have been what had happened. And there's just no way that the Teddy stuff didn't run long because it's Teddy Hart, so they probably had to cut some stuff. I don't know. I thought it was an awkward match. Like you mentioned, they teased a pile driver at one point because the Athletic Commission had banned the pile driver. Everybody had to get blood work done before this weekend. And it was deflating because, I thought the first match was actively bad. The second match was stupid, but I found enjoyment in it. I was kind of hoping this was going to steer the ship in the right direction, and instead it was just a disappointing 3-star match. Yeah,
like, I was 3 1/4, but we've talked before about what a good 3 1/4 and what a bad 3 1/4 is. This was a bad one.
Yeah, that's very fair.
And then we went into kind of an interesting match, just given who's all involved and given the fact that where they all came from and how they kind of then kind of just had this match out of nowhere. It was the Colony of Fire Ant and Grant versus the Gentleman's Club of Drew Gulak and Chuck Taylor. The Colony would win with the Chikara special by Green Ant on top of Drew Gulak in 14 minutes and 31 seconds. And I just thought this was fine. What were your thoughts?
Fine is exactly what it was. It was a lower tier Wrestle Factory tribute match, with the idea being that I guess the night before it Evolve, Orange Cassidy had walked out on the Gentleman's Club. I have no recollection of that, and I remember a lot from Evolve 28, which we'll talk about next week. But I guess Orange Cassidy walked out, and so you had Taylor and Gulak kind of bickering with each other throughout the match. Another match, and maybe, knowing what we know now, having our crystal ball, Gabe was planting the seeds, because I thought the finish in Biff versus Swan came out of nowhere. I thought the finish here, which was weird because it was a submission finish with Green Ant tapping out Gulak, I thought that came out of nowhere as well. Like, I thought the match was gearing up for this almost Dragon Gate-like finishing stretch, and then what happened was we almost had the precursor to like the grapple fuck flash submission finish out of nowhere.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's something that with it was done in a way that I was like, okay, as someone who watched enough Chikara, I was like, all right, I bought into the finish. But if you're someone who doesn't watch Chikara and you're only watching this because the WrestleMania Weekend shows, how are you to know anything? So it's just, it was abrupt. And the one thing is that we would soon learn that Catch Point stands for competition, and that's what and that's what it is. But it's also something that's kind of remarkable, given that like these four guys would have wrestled each other under different gimmicks or under different permutations for better parts of 6 years, and this was just kind of there. It was Gentleman's 3. The real high point of this match for me was how psyched Ron Nemi was for Kaiju Big Battle after the show.
That is very much the most dated part of the show. Not booking Teddy Hart to do a run-in, but the excitement for Kaiju Big Battle on commentary feels very 2014. Yeah, I was at 3 1/4 on this because, one of the things that I've picked up from this series, I think he's been booked in a lot of poor settings, but Gulak being what I consider to be good dating back to 2012 is something that surprised me because, there's obviously the freaks that have looked at him as one of the best wrestlers in the world. I've always liked him. I've never really put him on that tier. Even within his own company, I've always thought Biff Busick was better. And, obviously your Zack Sabre Jr.'s and your guys like that work a little bit of a flashier grappling style I've preferred to Gulak. He's someone that's impressed me in this series, though, just with how good he was from such a young age. So I thought he looked good working with the Ants here, and then he ends up tapping out, which leads us to an angle after the match.
Yeah, so Gulak attacks Taylor, and then Gulak yells at him on the microphone, and the only thing I can make out of it was that this was the end of the Gentleman's Club.
Yeah, another promo where I did not understand a single word that Drew Gulak said, but he turns on Chuck Taylor, he beats him up, and that would lead to the May Evolve shows that we just talked about. Chuck Taylor loses to Drew Gulak on Evolve 29, and then this is the final Chuck Taylor match in Evolve for 2 years. A 3-way match where Taylor loses with Ethan Page. They lose to Jigsaw. Jigsaw defeats Chuck Taylor and Ethan Page, is the final Chuck Taylor match in Evolve until he does the all-caps Dustin run a few years later. So Chuck Taylor is finally wrapping up with the promotion.
No, he does do one more shot in 2015 where the losing team must break up, and it was Ronin versus Moose and the Bravado Brothers. And that was it for him for
I stand corrected.
18
That's
months.
Right. He came in on that weekend, did a loser leaves town match that he won, and then wasn't booked again. But he's booked. That's the May Evolve shows. They run a triple shot in Florida in August, and then they run September in New York, and then China in October. He's on the China shows. He comes back for that one Evolve show in January, and then he's done. You're right. I stand corrected.
Yeah, and looking at the remaining Ronin matches, it is just insane because after that one, Gargano and Rich Swann lose to the Premier Athlete brand on WrestleMania weekend by referee's decision. Then in Orlando, they win the titles from the Premier Athlete brand in a street fight, and then they defeat Drew Gulak and Tracy Williams and LaBoom.
Well, Mike,
and that was it for Ronin.
2 weeks from now on our wrap-up show, I'm going to take you through what happened with the Open the Freedom Gate title and the Open the United Gate titles after Dragon Gate USA ran its final show. And we'll be talking a lot about that post-Prime Ronin run that I know you have so many fond memories of.
So next up is Trent versus Low-Ki, where Trent Beretta defeats Low-Ki with a Psycho knee in 18 minutes and 12 seconds.
I really enjoyed this for what it was. Now, before we talk about the match, I want to run down, this is April of 2014, the last 4 matches that Low-Ki had before he worked this match. September 15th, 2013, in All Japan Pro Wrestling, Kenzo and Takao Amore defeat D'Lo Brown and Low-Ki. After that, Akebono, who defeats Low-Ki in a singles match on All Japan's Royal Road Tournament. That would be Ki's final match in All Japan. And then February of 2014, he works 2 shots in Australia for New Horizon Pro Wrestling. He loses a 3-way match with Chris Weiss and Robbie Eagles. And then the next night, February 8th, 2014, defeats Robbie Eagles in a singles match. And now we have Ki versus Trent, a truly insane 5-match stretch.
Yeah, that is absolutely nuts. Like, I'm still wrapping my head around it, but hey, he got flew out to Australia at a time that he probably got good money for it because there's not a whole lot else happening in Australia, but, you know, that's Low-Ki for you.
And
that makes a lot of
wrestled
sense.
Robbie Eagles, which I would really like to see 2021 Low-Ki versus 2021 Robbie Eagles. I didn't YouTube it. I would like to see if that Ki versus Eagles match from 2014 is available, because that sounds like it could be decent. And I thought this Trent match was decent. I mean, Trent gets nothing. Ki beats the shit out of him. And I would love to talk to Trent, who is not exactly sharing one of the Davey Richards Low-Ki mentality. You know, Trent's the guy that likes to have a laugh, to say the least. And Low-Ki beats the shit out of him this entire match up until the finish. But because Low-Ki was so vicious, because this was so one-sided for so long, I thought it was entertaining as hell.
Yeah, I really like this. I like the idea of Trent Beretta in 2014 kind of already showing the shades of that you would see him in New Japan and All Elite Wrestling. You know, like, Trent was great in this, like, just being this compelling babyface clawing back, and then gets his shot, hits the knee, and that's it. Gets, like, the flash knockout, which I thought was really kind of cool. They did talk about, you've probably heard of this, the Jersey All-Pro match with Low-Ki and Sami Callihan, where Sami Callihan was knocked out in the first exchange. They did talk about that on commentary, which is like, oh yeah, that was during this time as well.
I don't think I knew that. I guess I heard them reference it on commentary, but it didn't click with me. It was, you know, it's just kind of, you know, Lenny was talking and I was listening to him, but not necessarily taking it in. I did not know about that match, I don't think, which is crazy because I would like to see that. That sounds good. Low-Ki and Sami Callihan had a match in AAW in 2017 that I had in my match of the year, as my number 10 match of the year that year. It was fucking bonkers. Abyss does a run-in a Low-Ki versus Sami Callihan match in AAW, and I still thought it was a 4.5-star match. So those two ended up having very good chemistry years later.
Yeah, I forget which Poppin' Dogs and Talking Hogs had this, but it was probably one of the Sami one. Maybe it was the Sami and maybe it was the one that was Sami Callihan and Ricochet, where he talks about this, that like he was completely knocked out into the match, completely concussed, and you know, Low-Ki being Low-Ki. I really like this, and maybe this is one of those things that on these shows, I feel like as we're getting towards the ends here, that after a lot that I really dislike, I kind of maybe overrate things here. But I went 4 stars on this. I really enjoyed this.
Okay, I'm not that high. I'm at 3.5. But I really respect what they did because, you know, I obviously Ki beats him up, but I thought Trent bumped really well for some of the stuff. You know, Ki at one point hits a John Woo dropkick, and because of the small ring they're working in, I think Trent literally bumped halfway across the ring and ended up in the corner on this John Woo kick. But it looked incredible. It was really, it's not good to build, you know, like if we were watching this match in a vacuum with no context, we would come away from this going, oh, they're building Low-Ki as like a future world champion. He looked so dominant in this match. Obviously not the goal, but this was exactly what Key wants. Like, this was a great showcase for him, and he looked awesome. Trent played his role tremendously, and then they hit this flash knee at the end, and Mike, the crowd gasped at the finish. They couldn't believe that Trent beat Low-Ki clean.
Yeah, and it was a really cool finishing stretch because he was up for the Warriors' way. Low-Ki was up on the top rope and Trent was dangling below. And then Trent was able to just get out of it and then hit the Basaiku knee. And one in the crowd just was like, wow. Because if you remember how Low-Ki was booked in 2011, 2012, Low-Ki wasn't taking any of those falls, brother.
No, not exactly.
So it's kind of remarkable, like, in this way. Like, I wonder what have had to happen for Low-Ki to agree to put over Trent Beretta in 2014.
I'm sure he got a fuck ton of money. I mean, Gabe, again, whether the visa situation is as accurate as Gabe described it or not, the bottom line is Gabe needed stars for this show, and then he knew that he needed stars long term, so one of those guys was going to have to take a fall, and Key's the guy that did that. And it was, weirdly good booking. Like, I think Trent came away from this match looking awesome, and I don't remember off the top of my head how they follow up with it, but Trent is obviously a mainstay and Evolve for another year and a half. I mean, I don't know if people remember the fact that Gabe had booked Roppongi Vice. Trent was with them that long, well into his New Japan run, and this was just a lot of fun. I thought Key looked great because it was exactly what he does well, and Trent bumped his ass off for him. So I'm at 3.5. It was really fun.
Yeah, no, this was an absolute blast. Then I don't remember if this was like an intermission thing, but they showed us the scrolling graphic for an interminable amount of time, and then Lenny Leonard got onto the PA system and then announced for Santa Clara, saying that we are the only ones within 5 miles of Santa Clara. No other show will be within 5 miles of Santa Clara in WWE. And it announced the fact that it would be WWN, it would be Evolve, and it would be Dragon Gate USA.
Yeah, well, obviously, Dragon Gate USA does not come back in 2015, but Gabe really won the turf war in Northern California, because the Ring of Honor event that year, they end up in Redwood City, and I don't know the exact proximity from where Gabe ran to where Redwood City, where Ring of Honor ran, was, but I remember the building that Ring of Honor ran looked like shit, and I actually kind of liked the building that Gabe ran that year. So for once, from a production standpoint, Gabe kind of came out on top.
Yeah, and I'm not one to speculate on here, but wasn't this getting close to the time that the famous Orlando Triple H coffee cup photo was taken?
So I think that photo, is from January 2016. But there was plenty of communication before that photo took place. It's not like Triple H logged onto Twitter and said, there's indie wrestling in my neck of the woods tonight. Let me log on to that. I don't have any doubts. And again, I don't know anything. I don't have any doubts that location was helped secured by World Wrestling Entertainment in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly. And then we went to our first of 2 main events. This one was Chris Hero versus Masato Tanaka. Masato Tanaka won with the sliding D in 17 minutes and 35 seconds. And this had a WrestleMania weekend big fight feel.
It's fucking rocked. I mean, this speaks to what an amazing career that Masato Tanaka has had for, at this point, 25, close to 30 years as being a guy that would take chair shot after chair shot after chair shot to the head and still, somehow got up. And I think the best work of his career was around this time period, this 2014-2015 Masato Tanaka, where he worked this match. Obviously, he's got a match with Kevin Steen on the WrestleMania weekend, WrestleCon Super Show. And then he's working in Noah at this time point, and it's him and Takashi Sugiura as the Dangan Yankees, which were one of the best tag teams in the world. I mean, they were unbelievable. They wrestled the Mighty Don't Kneel constantly, and all of those matches were really good. And I'm someone that, when it comes to greatest wrestler ever stuff like we've been talking about on this show and other shows, Masato Tanaka's in my top 50. I really think he's one of the best guys to ever do it, and this is the best run of his career. And again, knowing what we know now, I talked a little bit earlier about some of the flash, quick finishes on this show. And this is a sign, if anything, that the high flying that was prevalent on that first show, you look at the indie guys in that Frey match and all of the flips that they went in the ring and did, that's a sign that high flying is out and that hard hitting is in.
Yeah, this was just two guys being dudes just for 18 minutes, knocking the crap out of each other. And they really had like a cool conflict between the size differences and experience and skills. And they played like they played off of there might have been like a flash KO in the corner, which I thought was building off of how matches kind of ended abruptly on the show. I thought that was pretty spectacular, to be honest. I bought into that a lot. And then it's just two guys just doing the things. They had an awesome bomb tease, and then there's this idea of, I'm trying to read off my notes here. My handwriting's not too great here, but there's idea about like the Legends match, like Legends coming up on Mania weekend, and they come by and everyone's like happy to see them, but it comes off a little hollow. Like you could tell that they're there for the payday. Masato Tanaka's not there for the payday. Masato Tanaka's there to throw bombs. And, this was a match that I absolutely loved. It holds up. I would want to note that there was massive production issues for both this and the main event, that you could hear a buzzing in like the first 5 minutes of both of these matches, but that didn't take this away from me giving this match 4.5 stars. This match rocked.
A few things to note here. Your point about the Legends is actually a great point. It's something I hadn't thought of, but if you look at even 1 year into the future, the hyped main event for the Super Show in Northern California, Gabe booked Ricochet and Uhaa against Roderick Strong and Austin Aries, which was a match that at the time I was incredibly excited for. And for as obnoxious as Austin Aries is on a number of levels, I'm not breaking any news. I don't know if anybody likes him on a personal level, but Austin Aries is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, unfortunately. When it comes to greatest wrestler ever stuff, he's right by Masato Tanaka on my list. They're both top 50 guys in my opinion. Aries actively drags down that tag match. Aries works it
of course,
like it is, the easiest payday ever for him. Whereas, this Chris Hero versus Masato Tanaka match, I think the best thing you can say about it is if you book Chris Hero versus Masato Tanaka, this is the match you would envision. I'm at 4.5 stars as well. I think it is a chef's kiss of a match if there ever was, because it's exactly what you'd want from it.
I'll let you know that Rich Krace was also 4.5 stars on this match, because the number one result you had was the Voices of Wrestling review of this by Rich Krace.
You're goddamn right. VoiceToWrestling.com.
There we go. And then we had audio screw up. I guess that they started playing White Ghetto before, I guess, the selling of it by Lenny Leonard was done. But then we had our main event. It was where they opened the Freedom Gate title. It was Johnny Gargano versus Ricochet. Ricochet won with the Benadryller in 31 minutes and 37 seconds to become the fourth Open the Freedom Gate champion and the last Open the Freedom Gate champion while Dragon Gate USA is alive.
So before we talk about the match, we have to talk about Johnny Gargano. He has opened the Freedom Gate title run, which began at Freedom Fight 2011 on November 13th, 2011, on a show that featured Brody Lee, BJ Whitmer, Uhaa Nation before he had ever gone to Japan, Masato Yoshino, Shima, Ricochet, Pac, Sabu, Pinky Sanchez, to name a few. We've now seen Johnny Gargano's run, not in its entirety, because we didn't watch any of the Evolve stuff, but oh my god, it is like he wins and loses this title in two different promotions.
Oh, absolutely. And it's something where for a lot of the run, now that we've watched it in its entirety, not a tremendous run in my opinion. Like his babyface stuff was there, and then when he turned heel, a lot of it was really, really good, but nothing that would, like there were like 2 or 3 epics he had that were like defining, but when you have only 2 or 3 epics with a title run this long, comes off like it was just like not enough there for me in my opinion.
I think this is, well, we can do this now. Like I said around the shows we did covering the Miami weekend with Alan Forel, I think we were all a little shocked at just how underwhelmed we were with babyface Johnny Gargano, because my memory going into this series was that he won the title from Yamato after doing really solid work all of 2011, And then from there, he's a guy and he's good and he's constantly putting on these great matches. And what we saw was, outside of being in the ring with Akira Tozawa, Gargano kind of struggled in these main events, and he really had to grow into this position. And it's not until the Shingo match, or, to some extent, the John Davis no ropes match. And I'm not trolling Mike by saying that. I think we saw something from Gargano in that match that had been absent for a lot of that title run up to that point, which at that point it's a year into the run. But it's not until the Shingo match where he turns heel where something is really unlocked. And I do think the last year of this title run, despite a lackluster Trent match, is really, really impressive, because you go through that 2013, I'll give him the Shingo match and the 6-man from the night after. We have the Samurai Del Sol match in Evolve, which we did not watch for this project. Mike, have you seen that Del Sol match?
I have not, no.
It's excellent. So you have that, the Tozawa stuff from the 4th anniversary show that I thought came across super well. There's a Rich Swann match in Evolve that I don't remember, but it's Gargano and Swann. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that it was all right. And then it's, the Chris Hero match, which we both thought was great, an Uhaa Nation match in Evolve that I really like, the Trent match, which was disappointing, then that Roderick Strong match, which I also thought was great. So the year ends on an excellent note. The final year of his title run is excellent, and I think it's capped off by this, which finish in my top 10 in Match of the Year voting, 2014, the first year I had a Voices of Wrestling Match of the Year ballot, and I think it's one of the best matches in Dragon Gate USA history.
I liked it a great deal, but I wouldn't go that far, personally. I went 4.25 stars on it. I thought that this was a slight downgrade from the match before it. I think Lenny on commentary, for as much as we've extolled his greatness here, this is his best work, was explaining the year that Ricochet chased Johnny Gargano. I felt like that he was exceptional there, and I like the idea that eventually it was Ricochet came out strong and then was almost putting him away with a Benadryller, which, by the way, the Benadryller was a terrible looking move, by the way, guys. That move looked like terrible. I hate the Benadryller.
Mike, I'm going to fucking cut you off right now. I'm not mad at you. I love you. This was the best Benadryller Ricochet ever hit. I don't know what you're talking about. It looks like he takes Gargano's head off in this move.
Well, I'm talking about the one early on that he tries to go for.
Didn't look great.
I just think it's... You toss a guy up on your shoulders and you go like, all right, I'm going to do a kick here, and then you toss them straight back on their feet. Like, is it supposed to be some sort of equilibrium change that lets them be stunned for long enough for Ricochet to kick him? It's one of the rare moves, and I'm a moves guy. We know
we
that.
Love the moves.
We love the moves. I love the spots. I think every match should be 12 minutes long and just be move after move after move after move. But it's something where I'm just like this, and I think that the 2-point looks so much better where he does kind of like the Pele kick out of it. I thought that always looked awesome with this, but the story they told, like, that he almost had him there, but then Gargano was able to hang on and then kind of find inventive ways to get on the Gargano escape until he realized, I can't get this guy, and then he started to cheat, but all of his cheating did not work, and then Ricochet hit the 630 for a huge kick out that the crowd actually went nuts for that kick out, because we thought that was it. They bought completely into it, and then eventually he hit the Benadryller for the win there. It's great storytelling. I just think I'm not a Johnny Gargano guy, and I think that's probably why I mark this match lower than you do.
I think that's fair, because in 2014 in particular, I am all in on Gargano. At one point, I know I had 2 different Johnny Gargano shirts in my closet that I wore constantly my freshman year of high school. One being a ripoff of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers t-shirt, and I remember the people going oh, cool Power Ranger shirt. Oh, never mind. Don't know what that is. Very vivid memories of that. I was worried that this match would not hold up the way I thought it did, because I remember loving it at the time, giving it 4.75 stars, and wondering if it was going to be as good this time around. I have come to the conclusion, after watching 48 Dragon Gate USA shows before this, seeing Gargano in almost every single one of them, following Gargano's entire run in this promotion, for all of the Teddy Hart nonsense, for all of the poor production, for just the disaster that this promotion ended up being. Whatever happens next week, I don't care. this match was so perfectly executed that to me it makes the history and the lineage of Dragon Gate USA and the purposes of this project entirely worth it. I thought this had the emotional stake, the execution, and the drama behind it that your classic Ring of Honor World title matches had. I thought it was just sublime. I really bought into the story. I bought into the slow build. Dave says in The Observer for this show, he says it's a 45-minute match. It's not. It's 31 minutes, which is a huge difference. But for 31 minutes, was thoroughly entertained by this. I obviously knew the finish, and I'm buying into some of these Gargano near falls because you're right. The story of this match was how many times is this guy going to put on the Gargano escape and have Ricochet get out of it? And it was great. It made Ricochet look like $1 million. I thought Gargano looked great in defeat. And in the end, after the 6:30, after the Gargano escape, after all of this stuff, Ricochet hits what I think is the best Benadryller he ever hit. He cleans Gargano's clock. 4 3/4 stars from me. I was so incredibly satisfied and had this warm feeling in my stomach by the time this was over. This made everything worth it.
Yeah, this was, regardless of the extenuating circumstances, this was a moment, a capital M moment. This was, I mean, it's like that this is the funeral and the next show is the wake, you know? Like the after party, or maybe a lot of funerals I've been, everyone got together and drank afterwards. Maybe that's just me though. But that was, it felt like this was the end of Dragon Gate USA. And the one thing I wanted to note that we didn't talk about was probably one of the more inventive belt shots that Gargano does in this. So he does, like, how many attempts does Ricochet make for the Benadryl before he lands? I think it's like close to 3.
Something
where he
like
attempts
that,
it.
yeah.
But like the last one, Gargano already has the Freedom Gate title. He holds it up to his face, and Ricochet kicks it, and Ricochet sells it. And I thought that was actually a pretty inventive way of getting out of it.
Even the ref bump in this match was really well done. This is like, this type of match is exactly what's missing from the independent scene today, and it's something that we won't see because this is the type of stuff. Maybe it doesn't need to be a 2.5-year title run, but it does need to have some sort of build behind it because this match, let's use this for example. If this match happens at Evolve 10, where Gargano and Ricochet wrestled each other, if this is the match they do, it's probably fine. I'm probably giving it 4 stars, but it's not what I would consider to be this near perfect classic. This had story, and I was invested in it. I had this emotional attachment to this match that, for all of the faults of this promotion, the one steady line from 2009 to 2014 is the story of Johnny Gargano. And while he has disappointed me at times, I don't think he came across great in 2010. Don't think he came across great in 2012 when he had the belt. I think it's, the heel run in 2011 and the heel run in 2013 that really catapult him as a star in my eyes. This was it. I mean, this was the story where the right guy won the right match at the right place at the right time. It was incredibly well done. And Ricochet comes out of this match being the king of the Dragon system.
Yeah, so in the post-match, the entire Face locker room comes out to congratulate him. They lift him up on his shoulders. Rich Swann is pointing to him very happily. I mean, he finally gets to see the big turncoat get it, and then everyone kind of clears out, and Chuck Taylor walks into the ring. And after a long moment of the two of them staring each other down, they embrace in a hug in like a genuinely great moment. And then Ricochet picks up the microphone, and I think the reason why we're able to hear this is I think that the announcers turned up their headsets so that people could hear it. And Ricochet says that he wasn't on the first DGUSA show, but he was on the first Evolve show, and his path that he took since then completely changes up his life. And then he brings up the Ric Flair quote: "If you want to beat the man, if you want to be the man, it's beat the man." And then he talks about now being the double champion, and that makes him the top guy in the business. The crowd chants best in the world. And then he says he's not going to dodge any challenges, and that they just have to step up and face him in the ring because he will be a defending champion. And then he does the classic, did you all have a good time? Did you all have a good time? Go home. And as we could hear this, the reason why I knew that it was the commentators we could hear the last noise I heard was a commentator cough, and that was it and that was it for Open the Ultimate Gate 2014.
In a way, it's a shame that this isn't the final show, because to use the ECW comparison, for example, maybe you don't compare it to the 2 house shows that they had at the end of 2001, but even their final pay-per-view, it ends with a really weak, by their standards, Jerry Lynn versus RVD match, and you have like the 3-way stuff with Corino, Justin Credible, and Sandman that ends with Rhino winning the belt somehow. I forget what exactly happens there, but Rhino ends up the double champion, and then that Lynn versus RVD match just feels like a lesser version of what they were doing in 1999 and 2000. They go out on top here. Ricochet and Gargano have, again, what I think is a classic, one of the best matches I think Ricochet's ever had, and certainly one of the best matches that I think Gargano's ever had. And in a way, I'm choosing to end Dragon Gate USA canon here. And the next night is just whatever happens, I don't care. I am beyond fascinated to rewatch this show next week. But selfishly, just for the story, knowing that this is the end, it would have been really nice had the final show closed out like this. And I think even if the final show closed out like this, you want to talk about changing the narrative of Dragon Gate USA, you can take the final 6 shows, have them the way they are, but this is the final match on Dragon Gate USA show. People remember it much fondlier than they currently do. Much more fondly. Fondlier is not a word. Much more fondly than they currently do.
No, I think you're absolutely right about it, because then you have this really well told, which at the time when we first started watching this, I was like, this seems like kind of a long storyline, until I was like, oh wait, okay, this is what happens in New Orleans. It makes sense why they're stringing this out here. And it's very satisfying, and in a way, it kind of encapsulates the DGUSA experience that Ricochet, picked by CIMA before even going to a WWN event, becomes the first Gaijin Open the Dream Gate champion, and ends up being the only double champion in DGUSA history. And it just works. But that's not the world we live in. We live in a world where Mercury Rising 2014 happened.
From the same venue, the next night, April 5th, 2014, the final Dragon Gate USA show. With the 6-man tag team tournament, Chris Hero, Masato Tanaka, and Roderick Strong will wrestle AR Fox, Rich Swann, and Ricochet. We'll have a singles match, Mike, between Chuck Taylor and Maxwell Chicago. Then back to the 6-man tournament with Biff Busick, Chuck Taylor, and Teddy Hart against the Premier Athlete brand. And then Lince Dorado, Fire Ant, and Green Ant versus the Bravado Brothers and Moose. Before we get Ivelisse versus Mercedes Martinez in a Shine title match. Low Key versus Johnny Gargano in a singles match. And then the finals of the 6-man tag team tournament. And then we end Dragon Gate USA. We turn out the lights with a dark tag team match with the Bravado Brothers and Bad Influence.
I'm not going to reveal who are in the finals, but that is really kind of pissing on the grave, doing the Dragon Gate True trademark match as your final match of your promotion's existence.
It is something. We'll talk again next week. We'll talk about Evolve. We'll talk about Wrestling Odyssey. We'll talk about Ring of Honor. Probably some other fun stuff. If there's any topics, Mike, that we've missed along the way, next week is probably the time to cover them. But look, I remember watching this show live, and I remember feeling shocked is the word that comes to mind. Shocked at what I was saying.
Yeah, this is it. We've done the countdown for a while, but next will be the final show of Dragon Gate USA's history on episode 50. That kind of really worked out for us, didn't it?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's the reason I didn't make you watch one of the Evolve shows, was because once you told me, it was like, oh, it's going to be 50 episodes. Great. Fuck the Evolve show. I like the fact that it's 50 episodes. Now,
Case, did you do that because of the Evolve show, or did you do that because you knew the Evolve show I was going to suggest was Evolve Tribute to the Arena?
Mike, I would have quit the podcast had you made me watch Evolve 10. I just wouldn't have watched it. I was going to make you watch Evolve 25 with Davey Richards on it, and we would have had a grand old time.
We would have. But that's going to do it for this week. So for next week, where we finally close the gate on Dragon Gate USA, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at OpenTheVoiceGate. You can follow me at Fujiheya, and you can follow Case at _InYourCase. But for Case, I'm Mike, and thanks for listening to The Voice Gate. We'll be back next time to conclude rewind, and rewatch Dragon Gate USA. Take care.